right. Dance to the tune. Welcome, everybody, to this panel. Welcome to the use of manual war games. To the tune. Welcome, everybody, to this panel. Welcome to the use of manual war games. To the tune. Welcome, everybody, to this panel. Welcome to the use of manual war games. To the tune. All right. Once again, welcome to this panel for Advancing Manual War Games. I am James Pigeon Fielder, dialing in from Colorado State University. But who I am doesn't matter. I'm going to go right ahead and introduce you to our panelists for today in alphabetical order, starting with Ken Brown, who is the Division Chief for Scenarios and Wargaming, the Research Analyst Center of Army's Futures Command at White Sands Missile Range. He has 15 years experience as an operations research analyst for Department of the Army, 12 years experience participating in, designing, and conducting both war games and additional types of data collection events, focused mainly on tactical operations of U.S. Army forces. Next, we have Bill Harper. Major Harper is an operations officer with the Center for Army Analysis Campaigning Wargaming Division. He has participated in multiple battalion and brigade level warfighter and battle staff training exercises. And then we have Thomas Meyer, who is a managing director of Graymeyer Group and has over 30 years of leadership, wargaming, and volunteer management experience. He has been involved in various aspects of the wargaming community for over 40 years and has been playing, designing, developing, producing, and even at times selling war games in the private and government sectors. His latest government project was a member of the SSR Mindanao team that received the Army Modeling and Simulation Award. And I badly mispronounced that. That is okay. And then next we have Jeremy Sapinski, who is CNA's lead wargame designer. He has designed and facilitated dozens of war games at Navy and Joint Commands, as well as for the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense, Policy, and the Joint Staff. His war games help strategic decision makers understand the broad context of actions, as well as the tactical impacts and requirements that those decisions elicit. And then finally, we have Paul Works, who's currently serving as Director, Analytic Dad and Development Group. I imagine it's not Dad. The Research and Analysis Center, TRAC, Fort Leavenworth. He is responsible for TRAC FLVN Workforce Professional Development, analytic best practices and standards development, enabling analytic and business process innovation, and establishing a robust and enduring enterprise data management capability. And with that, I will turn it over to the panelists.
All right, we'll start with me, Paul Works. Yes, it wasn't Dad. It was Analytic Data and Development Group, iPhone auto correction. So I have a couple slides that will be brought up here in just a moment. So I'm from the Research and Analysis Center, formerly the TRADOC Analysis Center. We are at ORSA organization. Both Ken Brown and I both work for that group. We do operations research studies for the Army, AFC commander, vice chief, chief of staff, and so on, looking primarily at major weapon systems acquisition, support decisions, and scenario development. And I'll talk a little bit about how we use war games in those areas as we go forward. So let's go to the next slide, please. So TRAC, just to give you a little bit of background to lead into my main topic points, but for us, we use war games in two primary ways. We use them to develop operational scenarios. These operational scenarios are what are used for by regulation for all acquisition analyses within the Army, and they form the basis for testing and training scenarios that are used across the Army as well. And as part of that, for the wargaming pieces, we use wargaming structures and rock drills and map exercises, which are just you lay the maps down on a table, and you do all the tasks required to develop a scenario, sync matrices, and mobilization time from tip fids and stuff like that. And then a number of these nowadays, though, especially last year, they were enabled by online MapX support tools, which I'll briefly touch on in a minute. Then the other way we use Wargames is for direct study support. So as part of a study, we have a methodology that we set up for that study. And then as part of that methodology, there's what we call a data collection management plan, which says, okay, here are the study issues and the essential elements of analysis and measures of merit. And then that data collection management plan says, these are all the tools we're going to use to capture those measures of merit to respond to those study issues. And often, Wargames are required to develop data that we can't get from other like closed form models or simulations. So we use Wargames to help flesh that information out, that required information. So those are the two ways we use Wargames, primarily at Track. We have a number of different models and simulations, and these are not, except for OneSAF, these really aren't Wargames, right? They're closed form, non-man-in-the-loop simulations that we don't consider Wargames. We have AWARS Combat 21 and LBC, and then OneSAF is a man-in-the-loop, a PEO Stride developed tool that you can use closed form or man-in-the-loop. So with that, when it's man-in-the-loop, it's a Wargame. We also have some Wargame support tools, this VAST tool, which is basically a digitized map that you can digitally record movement and placement of assets as opposed to using a map board. And then we do custom designed Wargames that I'll talk about in the next main bullet. So here's some examples of some manual Wargames we've used. A number of years ago, we did the Irregular Warfare Tactical Wargame with the operational wraparound, which, oh, by the way, was designed, developed by the CNA folks that Jeremy's representing today. And then as a follow-on to that, we did this SSR Mindanao, which is a board game, kind of like a cross between Republic of Rome, diplomacy, and civilization, where it's current day Mindanao Island, and it's like phase 01, or competition phase activities in that environment. Then we did, a couple years ago, we did some dense urban environment wargaming with CCD or the DevCom guys and with RAND, and we looked at very detailed mega city / dense urban terrain, but that was a manual war game too that we had. It was a big production. And then just last year and a half ago, we did this civil affairs FMA, which I presented on Monday, and there we use a manual war game looking at strategic, operational, and tactical level questions associated with improving or changing civil affairs activities to align with multi-domain operations. All right, next slide. So my next slide, this is my last slide, but the things I wanted to point out, and because we're talking about manual war games, and this is, I wanted to highlight a couple of things that I feel are important about the manual war games. So for me, when you do a war game, the main benefits of doing a war game are to examine unknowns. If you know all the tactics and how things are going to be used and stuff like that, and most of the challenges, you might as well just put it in a simulation and run it 1,000 times. With war games, what the value they bring is to be able to identify things you wouldn't have immediately identified before. So where you don't know how soldiers or sailors or airmen will use a technology or a system, or you don't know how the 25 different things will interact and what the issues that might arise. So for me, that's the main the values of war games. And so when you do a fully automated or distributed war game like we were forced to do last year, you lose a lot of these things. And I'm not going to go through each one of these rows. You can look at them, but I'll focus on the bottom two rows. And that is, unless you have, so a fully automated distributed would be one that you just do online. that you do turn-based things online. An automation enabled is where you have a board game, but you have like the adjudication is automated with some Excel tool or whatnot. And then a manual is just a full automated thing where the people are rolling dice and they feel like they're changing the outcome with their dice. And often they do, just to let the players know. So for me, the fully automated, when you're all online, you're not in the room together, you're not leaning over a board together, having some kind of tactile feel and engagement, interaction with the other players, that's the stuff you're losing. And I'm sure other people are going to talk about that today. But for me, because war games are associated with understanding player decisions, the importance for them, why they made those decisions, so we can understand the nuances of something we didn't understand before, we lose a big chunk of that unless you're in the room together and interacting. And so for us, that's why we use manual war games, so we can capture those nuances, the player reasoning. And in fact, when the data collectors are collecting data in a fully manual or automation enabled war game, that's what they're data collecting on. You have people either on Microsoft Word or whatever, or on a notebook like me, and writing down what people are thinking and whatever, not just the decisions. So you can capture that narrative that is the important piece that comes out, one of the big important pieces that comes out of war games. All right, so my last bullet is for us at Track, since I've been recently put in charge of our professional development, one of the big things I'm going to push is, hey, I want to get everybody from a low journeyman level of wargaming capability at Track. That's what the level we are. They do map exercises and scenario development very well, but I want to get them up to the middle or higher level journeyman level, so that they can think about the more nuanced pieces of design development with when you put together a war game. And so that's my goal for the next few years as we go forward. And those are the slides I have. So I'll pass it off to Ken Brown.
All right, everybody. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So before we advance to my slides, let me just say, first of all, thanks for this opportunity. I feel fortunate. I feel intimidated and a bit uncomfortable talking amongst who I would consider the experts in this field. So, hey, thanks for those emotions that you're making me feel. So I'm an ORSA at Track Wismer. I'm responsible for both scenarios and war game development. Typically, I focus directly to support studies. The types of scenarios are really, for this talk, the types of war games I've been involved in are typically at the tactical level. So what does that mean? Well, for us, it's at the brigade and below level. So the next couple slides you're going to see are through my lens in terms of manual war games. I do believe that that we have to at least address or at least be cognizant of the challenges, sort of the questions that I plan on posing over the next two slides. Unfortunately, and from when I was a sergeant in the Marine Corps many years ago, my commander always told me, if you're going to present a problem, come up with a solution. I'm hoping that this group or this larger audience can come up with that solution, because I for one don't have that, but I do have some challenges and some larger strategic questions. So next slide, please. So what I was kind of torn with was what is a manual war game? You know, how is it defined amongst the community? How's it defined both in and across Department of Defense? As we all know, if you look at the definition of a war game, and I'm sure everyone's been asked that question, there are a few key individuals that we always tend to go back to their definition, say Peter Perler, for example. But you start to find out that there's a large number of war game definitions. So I think one of the things that we have to kind of wrap our heads around is, what do we mean by a manual war game? So I pulled this definition of manual games from the Compendium of War Game Terms from William L. Simpson. And, I read that and I said, well, a manual game is, I guess it's similar to a manual war game. But when I read that definition, I think it kind of, in my head, I had a certain expectation of what that means to me. What that means to me is a board, maybe a game in a box, map, a bunch of individuals sitting around a table. We're rolling dice, we're moving icons, etc. But I don't know if that's really the definition of what a manual war game is nowadays. Recognizing what Paul said in terms of his automated and then automated assistant and then a manual war game. So I think that's one of the challenges. So over the past probably 6 months, I've conducted a couple war games and a couple data collection events. And, basically all of them came in with sort of this task that I have here, conduct a manual war game. Of course, what they'll say is conduct a war game, to answer some question concerning some future capability, because that at track is what we're typically interested in: future capability, future concept, or future force structure. So, and then of course, all through the lens of some sort of emerging concept. For our case, it's multi-domain operations. So the challenges that I faced, and that I think that we are going to at least have to acknowledge or address if we plan on advancing the use of manual war games, is resourcing. So we all know, we've all experienced this, that we never have enough resources. So materials are always going to be a challenge: facilities, personnel, IT, administration, etc. Not to mention what we've all experienced is a distributed environment, and that in and of itself presents some challenges. I also believe that because we are now somewhat comfortable in a distributed environment, bringing back everyone into a single location will always be a challenge. For me, classification issues are always a challenge when it comes to any type of manual war game. All the war games that I have ever done have always been classified. And I think that's something that we have to think about in terms of, again, advancing sort of the use of manual war games. Time available. So it's not just a time available to research and design, but then it's to execute and then to conduct analysis. And then finally, and this is a sort of a big point I like to hit, is the historical record. So, I view this through the lens of an ORSA, through an analyst. And it's not just, and of course, the focus of any war game is the data. That's what we're all interested in. And so to me, if the game, I think we have to advance the use of this with the acknowledgement that at the end of the day, we have to be able to capture, we have to be able to organize, and then ultimately we have to be able to provide that historical record for some time in the future, way after the game has culminated, or maybe the game designers and the analysis team that has been associated with that are long gone. And I think that's a really big point, just so we're not recreating the wheel. Next slide, please. And as we're waiting, okay, so those challenges were sort of what I would consider sort of local challenges, or the challenges that I'm sure we all experience, when we're asked to conduct some sort of wargaming event. But I think that there's some larger strategic challenges, or sort of a strategic narrative, that we're going to have to wrestle with when we try to advance the use of manual war games. Number one, does the definition of manual war game align with the perceptions / expectations from senior leaders? So when I talk to a senior leader or they talk to me and they say, I want to conduct a war game, what is their expectation? I think that everyone in the group and everyone listening has a pretty solid understanding of what a war game can and cannot do. Unfortunately, our senior leaders or other decision makers may not have that same level of knowledge, and we always run into sort of the perception versus the reality. The second point, as they're currently defined, are they sufficient to answer those senior leader critical issues? I completely acknowledge what typically a war game is used to get at. Those decisions, those unknowns, those friction points which you would not have been aware of. But again, are those sufficient to answer what senior leaders are expected? And I think we have to think of that if we're trying to advance the use of war games. Also, what data comes out of war games? This is sort of follow on. What is the data that is coming out of these manual war games versus what is the analytical expectations from the outcomes of war games? We have all, and we'll talk about this tomorrow in the war game analysis, but I think we've all suffered through the question of, well, who won, or how better did my capability do? Finally, or not finally, but the fourth bullet, and I was listening to one of the very first talks, and Peter Perla in the chat on YouTube made a statement, and I wanted to capture it. And that is, so how should manual war games, those are my words, but he said, his point was, we have to demonstrate value in ways that others value. So to me, how should manual war games evolve to be able to demonstrate that value in ways that others value? And that, of course, has, it depends, tacked right on the end of that. And then finally, I would say, and this is sort of just a throwaway question, but if we're talking about a manual war game, well, I immediately go to, well, what's a non-manual war game? I don't know if we've really defined that, and I guess that probably gets wrapped up into the definition of manual war games, accounting for all the new tools and techniques that we're now using in conducting war games. So that is, those are my slides, and I hand it back to the team.
So Jeremy, Dr. Spinski is next.
All right, thanks. So I appreciate Ken's discussion about the definitions, right? And I started in the same place. What does it mean for manual war games? And folks that have talked to me about this know that I don't care what you call it, but I do care that you define what it is that we're talking about. And I think Ken did a great job of pulling that out and making sure that we understand whether we're talking to each other or whether we're talking to senior leaders. We have to make sure that we know that we're talking about the same thing, because there are so many different definitions out there. So when I saw the panel title of Advancing Manual War Games, I chose to interpret it as, how can we make in-person wargaming better? How can we advance the use of in-person wargaming? And even by asking this question, we have an implicit assumption that says in-person wargaming has qualities that are different than those in a virtual environment war game. I'm not saying better, but different, and saying that there is something that is unique to manual war games that cannot be done in virtual. Otherwise, there's no point. We have a distinction without a difference. So if there is a difference, then there are probably times when you want to leverage the qualities of a manual war game, leverage the qualities of an in-person war game, that you in ways to advance what you are trying to do with a war game. And it all comes down to, when you say war game, what are you trying to do with the people in the room? And I've written about this before, but to improve any war game, whether it's virtual, in-person, manual, or whatever definition you want to call it, it's imperative that you define the outcome of the war game, what it is that the war game is trying to do within the larger context. What are you trying to do tactically with that war game? What is the outcome? What is the immediate objectives? What are you trying to have in your hand with that war game? And then what are the constraints, restraints, and limitations that your war game is subject to include things like, it has to be virtual, or I want it to be in person, right? So when you've considered all of those and decided what qualities of a war game are going to best contribute to your outcomes and objectives and are going to fit within your constraints, restraints, and limitations, and you've decided that a manual war game is the thing that gets you where you want to go, then you have to decide, how can we make the manual part of the war game better? And when I was first trying to decide what it is that you could do to make manual war games better, I ended up, the first few things that I thought of were things that were generic to any war game, that would work for a manual war game, or a virtual war game, or a hybrid war game, or a holographic war game. So I wanted to try to pull out the specific suggestions and the specific thoughts that I had about what we have done at CNA in the past to make sure that our manual war games do the best that they could possibly do. Our in-person war games do the best that they can possibly do. And to some extent, this has an implication about what those qualities of an in-person war game are that make it different or special or unique over a virtual war game. But that first one there, providing lunch and snacks, when I first thought about this, I thought, well, the first three things that I need to make sure that I mention are carbohydrates, sugar, and caffeine. But I could loop all of those into lunch and snacks. And we always talk about, the most important thing in a war game is providing food. And we talk about that in a flippant manner, but it's not flippant. If you have a tired or a hungry player, they are not playing. They are not contributing to their best. They are not being their best player. And in a manual war game, they can't as easily pop off to the coffee maker in the kitchen or walk to the galley in their office to go get some snacks. You need to provide that for them because you're locking them in a room where they may not have access to it. So it's imperative on you designing and running the war game to provide the creature comforts that your players need to be the best selves that they can be to contribute to your game, to contribute to the information that you all have. And the last two are about utilizing the fact that you are in person. And there are two in-person facts that are the qualities that make manual wargaming or in-person wargaming different than virtual wargame. One is you have an opportunity to set the space. You have an opportunity to place maps. You have an opportunity to place information on the walls, on the floors, on the tables, on the ceilings, on the counters. You can utilize the physical texture of everything that person encounters to enhance the synthetic experience and to focus their attention to the things that you want them to do. Do you want them to pay attention to space or cyber? Well, make sure that there's something in front of their eyes that reminds them that you want them to care about space or cyber. Make sure that they are seeing things and reminded of things, be it by sight, sound, or smell. I haven't incorporated smell into any of my war games, but maybe I want to try to figure out how to make a scratch and sniff counter that makes people smell gunpowder smoke when they roll their dice or something like that, to make them focus on the things that they want to be focused, that you want them to be thinking about. When you give them in a virtual war game, if you send them files, they can minimize those and they can get hidden in tabs or in desktops. But in person, if you put a poster on a wall and tape it in the blue team room or the red team room or on the map in front of them, it forces them to pay attention to it. And then the second quality that I think really distinguishes in-person war games from virtual war games is the multi-threadedness of the conversations. In a virtual environment, you have a one-to-many conversation. I am talking, everyone is listening. Yes, there are people typing away on Discord, having some side conversations, but it's hard for all of us to be participating to the same level in those conversations and bring those up into the middle. The person that's facilitating or the person that's standing in front of the room can't, in a virtual environment yet that I have been able to see in a good platform, especially one that can be used in a classified environment, manage to understand or know what's going on and to easily facilitate the back and forth conversations that you can have by walking from one room to another room, or by walking from one end of the room to another end of the room, or by seeing two people talking in the other end of the room and saying, oh, I need to be a part of that conversation. There's a multi-threadedness to the information flow that you can generate from an in-person war game, and there's a network that can be created from it. So I think it's important whenever you're looking to improve a war game to hit those three bullets right in the middle. Think about what you are trying to do with your war game, and if you have to do an in-person war game, which there are a lot of good reasons why you should be doing in-person war games, make sure that you leverage the unique qualities in order to advance the things that you're trying to do. Thanks.
All right. Hello. My name is Major Bill Harper. I'm an operations analyst and officer with the Center for Army Analysis Campaign Wargaming Division. And I definitely appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And I would like to thank the hosts for this opportunity. What we at the Center for Army Analysis do, we are a field operating agency under the Army G8. And we provide the Chief of Staff with objective and independent strategic analysis on land warfare in a joint and combined arms environment. This information is necessary because it informs the senior leader decisions on current and future national security issues. What we have are 8 core competencies, in which wargaming is one of the competencies, and it feeds the other core competencies, that being campaign analysis, operations and force structure analysis, as well as capability analysis and data science. Also, we do strategic and operational analysis, and also workforce development for our analysis and modeling simulation community. Finally, we do set the policy and strategy for modeling and simulations. All of this is necessary to provide leaders with strategic analysis and insight on how the Army military supports the other elements of national power, that being diplomatic, informational, economic, and political. One of the things that wargaming does also is it drives the resourcing, leading to new capabilities as well as new doctrine. And finally, it promotes a common understanding and alignment of the tactical, operational, and strategic levels of war throughout the force. Within the campaign wargaming division, we provide warfighters with timely and substantive, credible decision support that influences programmatic and resourcing decisions. What we do is provide the foundation for senior support decision support products, and we have 4 distinct capabilities that we operate from. The first one is we have comprehensive experience. Within our division, we have a mix of analytical and operational knowledge, and our team has a combined 50 years of experience with the military, whether it's on the civilian side of the house, the uniform side of the house, and even the contracting side of the house. What we do best is incorporate that operational experience with institutional knowledge on force structure and our own current capabilities and developing capabilities. We have career civilians that provide continuity, and we also integrate the reserve component, both National Guard and Army Reserve, in order to get their perspectives on how the reserve force influences strategic decisions. In addition, we have an established operational wargaming methodology. What this is, it's a 10-step accelerated wargaming sequence that provides a standard method for leaders to understand individual events and how they impact an operation holistically. With that, and this is where we get into more of the distributed environments that we've been in over the last 15 months, we integrate technology pretty well. We have a wargaming methodology that is portable to distributed environments. What we use is an Excel-based adjudication system that feeds cause and effect data to support strategic modeling and produces information to drive support of the national defense strategy. We have 2 different tools. One is the standard wargame integration and facilitation tool, as well as the virtual map support tool that provides leaders with real-time analysis on how simple decisions can impact the battle space. Finally, what we're able to, our last capability is we are able to integrate emerging doctrine into our scenarios. What wargaming is about is the lessons learned and how improved capabilities are played out in different scenarios. Our division complements this by leveraging our own experience and relationships that the team has built. Of note, we were able to recently use these relationships with the schoolhouses to obtain information on current doctrine and how it represents its importance to our mission partners. What wargaming ultimately is, it's a planning tool that provides leaders with an edge and increases a unit's lethality, agility, and resiliency. Wargaming provides a critical analysis for commanders and warfighters, and over the last 15 months, manual wargaming has moved from the in-person environment to the distributed environment, or, for lack of a better word, virtual environment. What this does, it provides leaders with the ability to practice scenarios that are scalable to specific audiences, geographic areas, and also allows leaders to visualize their interactions with other agencies, non-governmental agencies, as well as local services and local forces. I do have additional information that I'm looking forward to talk about today, And I look forward to answering everybody's questions and discussing these topics further.
Okay, I think I'm next. It just occurred to me that I'm the non-government affiliated participant in this panel. So I think that my thoughts, as I made some notes, probably a little bit more philosophical and theory related, as opposed to some of the more practical and detailed work that the other members are doing. I noted on my slide, and it's probably a little wordier than I like because I know we're going to be collecting data from this panel, so I wanted to make sure that data collectors could capture it. But in addition to my introduction, I am a retired Army officer who then became a defense contractor, but then also was a nonprofit fundraising professional. And wanting to tie my two loves together, I ended up starting my own firm so I can do both. All of that said, I would make two main points today that I've kind of put on my slides, but one of the things on the current advancing of manual war games that I think we see in the community is the Department of Defense memo that came out a few years back really emboldened those war gamers that all of us know existed across the services, and something that war gamers could really hang their hat on and say, hey, look, this is something that's been recognized that we need to be doing, which has been great. The other thing I noticed that war gamers have been adding to the body of knowledge, both not just to the theory of wargaming, but practical applications and the positive uses, as the other members have talked about here. I mean, two examples I give is as early as the 80s, when I was doing research, I found theses from the National Intelligence University where wargaming was being discussed as applicable there. And now we see new programs such as the one at CGSC where it's a thesis track. So these are all things that have been going on, but expanses and opportunities for us to advance the use of the manual games. My second main point is I think a lot of good questions have been asked, and I sum it up as what's going to be the next impactful innovation or technique. To me, 20 years ago, the options of giving a game player, instead of just asking them, well, you can move or you can shoot, we came up with, no, you've got a variety of options. You have so many resources, and how do you want to apply them? Do you want to use them economically or move or shoot? So you gave a bunch of options, and a lot of those I think we're seeing in our materialized practical application as the card-driven games across both in use in DoD. You know, my first ones I saw was at CNA, Jeremy, back with Peter Perla back in the day. And then I saw it expand out across the community. 10 years ago, when I helped work on the Mindanao project with TRAC, I saw what I was seeing as the cooperative actions, where you started allowing players to show them, hey, if I work with this other faction, we both can advance. And that faction isn't always going to be, quote unquote, a good guy. So bringing that into the wargaming toolkit, so to speak. Well, here we are 10 years later, and so I'm thinking that we need to be thinking about what's going to be the next innovation or technique. And this, I think, directly ties into a couple of things. One that was Ken was talking about, you know, what's going to be next, but also Jeremy talking about what to do. And he was talking about the synergy of teams or groups. And I take it to the next step further and I say, okay, the current generation of clients and users of war games are probably people in their 30s, in my opinion. And those are the people we should reach out to and maybe survey through, whether they're at the schoolhouse or they're participating in stuff with Bill Harper and his crew, or CNA is running a game and there's a survey, but take some time to figure out what resonates with them as far as when they are participating in a war game, what technique or presentation of the material captures that. And the other note that I thought of while we were talking here was, one of the things from seeing some of the other panels this week is the integration of cyber, which often some of the discussions have been, it seems to be just overlaid on top of existing techniques in games. Maybe someone can come up with the innovation that's going to say, no, we're going to truly integrate cyber into the manual war game. And someone's smart, and it's probably going to be one of these discussions, just like Jeremy was saying, the importance of a in-person war game. You've got some food and drink, there's some social interaction, there's an off-thread conversation about it, and someone's going to have the idea. So all of us being on the lookout for that idea and tossing those ideas around, I think are going to be the way to go. That's my prepared comments. Back to Paul, I believe.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So thanks, everybody. And Pigeon's going to take over the moderation for the questions and so forth.
Oh yeah, so I've posted 4 questions already in the chat. I'll go in order that they were submitted via Discord. Starting, let's see, with Sebastian Bay. What are some challenges hindering the advancing the use of manual games?
Well, I'll start with that one, and then anybody can kick in. So for me, the main challenge that to doing a manual game is just the resources to get everybody together. That's my opinion. So that's the main physical implementation challenge. The other main challenge is what Jeremy touched on earlier, is getting the decision maker. If they say, "Hey, we want to run a war game," well, why do they want to run a war game? What are they trying to get out of the war game? Maybe some other tool or method is better for it. So talking through them about that and really making sure that's what they need is the other piece. But for me, the main challenge, and it's going to be in the future too, is just getting the TDY and getting all those uniform guys and whoever else together in the room to play it. Over.
Yeah, and that's becoming an increasing challenge, right? Not only because space considerations are hard to come by at the right classification level for your war game, but we're consistently getting well, can't you run it virtually? And we have to have a conversation with our sponsors about what you're going to get and what you're not going to get virtually, which goes back to those objectives, which is, and having the conversations with your sponsor to say, this is what you can do, and this is what you can't do, and this is why the game I've designed for you in person cannot be run as a virtual game if you want to get the same objectives. And if you're going to change my constraints and restraints or limitations, then we're going to have to revisit your conversation about the objectives and the outcomes that you're expecting to get for the game. So the challenges are primarily that resource constraint that Paul was talking about. And then you have the intellectual problem of communicating what it is games can and can't do to the person that wants that's imposing those constraints on
you. I would just also add, really falling back on the basics. Stakeholder communication is very important, and that's on both sides of the aisle. Also, a good adjudication system, as well as ensuring that your components are standardized. You have a standardized battle sequence like we use, where we start with weather and we go right down the line for the ISR piece, and then into the actual wargaming piece itself, and then a hot wash. Holding people to the milestones, as well as making sure the data is integrated.
Yeah, and hey guys, I have another point too, and that is, I think one of the biggest challenges is, so what is the expertise required for a war gamer? It's a war game is easy to do if you don't have to do it. To me, what does a war gamer or someone who's designing a war game have to do? Well, I think they have to be an analyst. They have to be somewhat of an expert in scenarios. They have to be an expert in war game design. They have to be a good facilitator. They have to understand capabilities and concepts which they may not have the expertise in. So you can think across from an Army's perspective across all the warfighting functions. You have to be an expert or at least aware of emerging, say, doctrine that's coming up. A perfect example is I need to do a war game on the concept of convergence. Well, what does that mean? So I think that it is required of someone to really be a professional in the wargaming community or to do war games is, we put a lot of expectations on their shoulders, and I think we will all agree that that takes time, effort, and the saying is you resource what's important. I believe that's important, and so it has to be resourced properly. Over.
All right, I will move on. Oh, go ahead. Before I move on to the next question, if someone had.
Yeah, I just follow up on Ken's comment and expand on that just a little bit. I was watching the panel earlier in the week, and Jeff Hodges and the simulations functional area folks had identified the need to train people how to design and then put on war games, which I think ties into what Jeremy and Ken were saying, is that not only do you need who can be a war gamer, but having a system to train people to make and then run war games, whether you call them a facilitator, I think it's a little bit different than just a facilitator. It's a different set of skills, understanding all of the goals and objectives of the director of who's asked for the war game, but then being smart enough to make sure that when you bring in a bunch of people who maybe aren't historically war gamers, to get them involved and capture them in the game.
Okay, so from Corey Phillips, we have, how do we shift the expectation of war game outcomes from data to discussion?
Well, for me, and Ken and I have had multiple long conversations about this. It's continued. I wouldn't call it beating on the drum, but it's continually reiterating what you can get out of a war game to our leaders, to our workforce, to our leaders in track, and then to our sponsors and decision makers. It's just continuing. I mean, you may have to tell them 10 times, and it's just, as war gamers, at least the people that are espousing them, we got to be patient with that, because a lot of these people don't understand. It's not that they're dumb. They just don't understand. They just don't, they're not thinking like we do. So we need to help them understand, to continually reiterate to them. And of course, you don't want to say it the same way exactly every time, because you will be insane if not. You got to change the way you communicate it, right? So you kind of come at it from different directions. So that, for me, it's just getting people to think that way. Because and I'm sorry, I'll go on a little too long here, but because a lot of people, and Ken brought this up earlier, it's, hey, they're looking for numbers out of a war game. They're looking to say, oh, I know it's 75% more kills or something. Well, for me, if you get that out of a war game, that's just nearly happenstance and a benefit bonus. What you're really wanting to know is the qualitative discussion and the narratives and why the players made the decisions. Over.
Really,
Yeah, that last sentence of Paul's just basically was exactly what I was going to say. A war game bringing you qualitative data as opposed to the quantitative data.
I'd also add that just from a training and operator perspective, war games provide a training tool to commanders, and part of that training is the discussion at the end on how we can make it better, what we learned, what we can hope to accomplish in the next round. So really, that focus on what it is on training and how we can improve our force. Over.
All right. Barring other comments, I'll move on to the next question. So Sebastian Bay is on fire. He's got another one. How do we create a better repository of professional manual games to improve collaboration and innovation?
So this is another favorite one of mine. So for me, one of the we have this analytic standards thing that we put together with the CAA and AMSA DAC guys a few years ago, and one of the pieces of that is to be able to at least mentally reproduce what your analysis has done, if not physically reproduce it. So for me, one of these is, hey, if we want to have this repository, that means we've got to document what we did in the war game. It can't be completely ad hoc. So if you got a rule set, if you got counters, playing pieces, or whatever, maps, that has to be documented. And as long as we have that documented, that should at least that gives us the ability to store this and to send it off to whoever, give it to whoever needs it. And whether or not they use what we have, it may give them ideas how to build their own game. Over.
Anyone else? All right, then. I will move on to Ann Johnson asks, do you include in your definitions outcomes, objectives, etc., the ways you are going to measure achieving them?
Yeah, you want to start with that one, Ken, or you want me
to? Paul, why don't you tackle that one?
Okay, I'll do this one. Yeah. So this one's a big one. So for me, that when you do a war game, we put together this thing, and I mentioned in my slides a thing called a data collection management plan. And the data collection management plan, what it is it lists all the study issues and what the Army calls essential elements analysis, which are basically sub-study issues, and then the measures of merit, the measure of performance, measure of effectiveness, and other data that you are going to capture that collectively answer some of those questions, study issues, and so on. And so over on the right-hand side of that, if you think of it as an Excel chart, on the right-hand side of that thing, you have these columns that show the tools you're using to collect those pieces of data. And then in addition, it may say, okay, we're going to use a war game, but this is how we're going to collect that piece of data during the war game. Is it going to be a manual, somebody writing it down, or is it going to be some data collection tools like Automate, like the CAA cause thing that may collect data on an adjudication? Yes. So we absolutely do that. For every single thing we want to collect, we decide what tool we're using to do it and how we're going to collect those data. Over.
Yeah, Paul, but I think one of the challenges is it kind of goes back to the first question of data versus discussion, is that we in the past have gone through a very deliberate process in terms of identifying exactly what's coming out of a war game, what questions it's going to answer, and of course what questions it is not going to answer. However, that does not stop a senior leader from asking, well, at the end of the day, once the war game is done, it's been designed, it's been executed, the data has been analyzed, the final briefing has been done. Now you're briefing some senior leader, and they ask you the question of, well, did they win? Or what about this? So, to me, tying that, that our data collection management plan to the senior leader and making sure that they understand the what are the limitations, or we understand their expectations, they understand our limitations of what the tool that we're using to produce data is going to provide is absolutely critical. However, we have all run into the buzzsaw of, well, this is the question I was expecting the game to answer, and it didn't. Over.
Good point.
All right. So we have about 6 minutes left and 2 questions left that I've seen. I think we can get through those. Here we go from Ryan Kennedy, who asks, do you think that there has been a tendency in the war game community to overly rely on seminar and matrix-based war games to compensate for the difficult process of creating quantitative metrics required for traditional rigid or semi-rigid tabletop games?
I have not seen that. We do use Seminar, not Matrix games yet, but we do use Seminar war games a lot. But really, if we can't find the hardcore quantitative data, we bring SMEs in, uniform guys or technical experts, and we developed data off that, and that's part of our limitations and assumptions that we capture as part of that we don't have like hardcore technical data on something. We have experiential data, empirical data that we use to build that. So I have not seen that tendency.
What I was seeing was the early on in exercise planning, some very good discussions on what type of war game is going to be suitable. Is it going to be one that needs to be run in a simulation with hard data, or is it going to be more of a seminar? So, and personally, I think that the going back and opening more to some of the more qualitative discussion war games has been a good thing, because to me there became an over-reliance for a while on, well, we just got to run it through a computer and run a simulation on it, and that wasn't capturing a lot of the softer data. So for me, what I've been seeing is for the most part, some good discussions up front. These are the outcomes we want at the end of this particular event that's coming up. What's the best tool to use? That's what I've seen. Over.
All right, then I'll move on to the last question. We have, again, from Sebastian Bay. Woo! How do we encourage wargaming designers and organizations to be innovative and not recycle the same old designs over and over again?
That is a great point. And for me, it's just an opportunity we have here at Fort Leavenworth with the CGSC, James Starrett and Colonel Lord and those guys over at CGSC, is they have this wargaming demonstration series where for instructors and students and people like us across the pond, we can go, they set up a game and then they show how it works, and we talk through it, maybe play a turn or two. But for me, that is invaluable to learn how other people have thought how to solve represent a problem. And I have used leverage multiple techniques that other designers have come up with to apply to our war games. And for us, just doing something like that, you don't have to be the only innovative. You don't have to do it's not developed here thing. If somebody else has thought of it in the wargaming community, why not use it? Should use it. Over.
I go back to the comment that I just made which is one way to encourage that too is at the beginning of when you're defining what you want to get out of an event, a good discussion about what war games are available, and if there's not one available that's going to do what you want to do, hey, can you find one, or can someone modify one? And force innovation by telling them we're not getting the answers we need out of the designs that we have available.
Also, you really need to understand your audience. Is the war game you're looking to do to designs it for senior leaders who are looking at the strategy of an overall scenario, or are you looking at battalion commanders who want to exercise their companies, and even down to the NCO, their squads on tactical matters? Do you want to include what forces do you want to include, whether it's local forces, emergency forces, and so on? Over.
All right. Well, barring any other comments, that gives us 20 seconds left. I want to thank everyone for their participation in today's panel. A lot of great conversation, great remarks. and and pop it into the Discord channel briefly to see if anyone else has any questions, comments, or thinly veiled threats. And again, thank you, and I will see you at the rest of Connections.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.